I have to tell you, the single biggest culture shock I have experienced since moving to the UK hasn't been the driving on the left, and it hasn't been the beans on toast. It's the way this country handles its history. In the US, if we have something old, and I mean like 1776 old, we put it behind bulletproof glass, we surround it with velvet ropes, and we have a security guard named Steve watching you like a hawk. But here, I was walking my dog the other day, just a random Tuesday, and my neighbour, let's call her Sarah, waves at me. We're standing next to this crumbling stone wall that looks like it's seen better days. I lean on it to tie my shoe, and Sarah goes, "Oh, careful, love, that's part of the original Roman city gate." I literally jumped back. I am leaning on a 2,000-year-old structure while my dog sniffs it. And that is the magic of the UK. It is an open-air museum. But over the last year, I've started to realize that this honor system comes with a really dark downside. Because when you leave history out in the open, trusting people to be decent, people will inevitably prove you wrong. We need to talk about this because I have gone down a rabbit hole of news stories, local gossip, and history blogs, and the way people are destroying UK history, sometimes on purpose, sometimes just by being agonizingly stupid, is absolutely blowing my mind. It's not just vandalism, it's like this weird collision of narcissism, greed, and just not understanding that a rock isn't just a rock. So, get a cup of tea, because we are going to dive into the absolute madness of what happens when stupid people are let near British history. Let's start with the one that genuinely hurts my brain because it seems so innocent. It's the Make-A-Wish vandalism. I was chatting with a friend of mine who volunteers at one of the big national parks here. These places that have rock formations that are millions of years old. And she told me that one of their biggest headaches isn't gangs or looters. It's nice families. In the US, we have the motto, "Leave no trace." We get that drilled into us. But for some reason, when tourists, and yes, I'm looking at us, Americans, but also everyone else, see a historic crack in a rock or an ancient well, the instinct is to wedge a coin into it. It looks cute, right? You make a wish, you leave a penny. But here is the science that nobody thinks about, which I learned and was horrified by. Modern coins are made of different metal alloys than the old school gold or silver ones. When you wedge a modern copper or nickel coin into a crack in soft limestone or sandstone, and then it rains, which, spoiler alert, it does every 20 minutes here, you create a chemical battery. The metal corrodes, it expands, and it literally shatters the rock from the inside out. My friend told me about these ancient geological formations, things that survived the Ice Age, that are literally crumbling at the edges because thousands of people wanted to leave a 50p piece for good luck. And the cleanup, it's not just a guy with a broom. They have to hire conservation specialists to rappel down cliffs and use tweezers to remove these coins one by one so they don't collapse the rock face. It's death by 1,000 cuts, but with currency. It completely changed how I look at those cute tourist rituals. It's not leaving a wish, it's leaving a chemical weapon. But if that's accidental damage, we have to talk about the ego damage. The I was here crowd, I went to visit this incredible ruined abbey a few months ago. It's this massive roofless cathedral that was destroyed by Henry VIII, which is a whole other story of historical vandalism, by the way, but what's left is majestic. It's quiet, it's green, it's spiritual. And then I looked closer at one of the pillars. Etched into the stone, right over a medieval mason's mark, was something like Gary 2K24. I remember standing there feeling this boiling rage. I asked a guide about it, and she gave me this tired smile and said, "It happens every week. Here is the psychological disconnect that I cannot wrap my head around." In the US, if you go to a national park, you expect a ranger to tackle you if you pull out a knife. Here, these sites are often in the middle of a field, totally unmanned. The UK operates on the belief that you, as a human being, possess basic respect. But the guide explained something really profound to me. She said that for centuries, people have carved their names. You can find graffiti from 1800, 1750, even 1600. Historians actually study that stuff now. It tells us about the social history of the time. So Gary with his car keys thinks he's doing the same thing. He thinks he's adding to history. But there is a difference. When a soldier in the 1700s carved his name before going off to war, that was a dialogue with the building. Today, when someone carves their Instagram handle or a crude drawing, it's just narcissism. It's branding. It's saying, my 5 seconds of being here is more important than the 800 years this stone has stood. There was a case recently I read about in Scotland. This Neolithic stone circle, older than the pyramids. I mean, this is deep, deep time, and someone decided to engrave it, not with chalk, which washes off. They carved it. The police appealed for witnesses, and the locals were heartbroken. In the US, we'd be like, oh, that's a shame. But here, because the history is local, because that stone circle is part of the village's identity, people took it personally. It was like someone walked into their grandmother's living room and slashed the sofa. And the cost. To fix that, you can't just sand it down, because then you lose the shape of the stone. You have to bring in laser scanners and restoration experts. One moment of boredom with a pocket knife costs the charity that runs the place thousands of pounds. It is maddening. But let's level up from vandalism to straight up theft. And I'm not talking about stealing a postcard, I'm talking about nighthawking. The first time I heard this term, I thought it sounded kind of cool, like a superhero or a spy movie, the Nighthawks, but it is actually the scourge of British archaeology. So, metal detecting. In the UK, it's a huge hobby. There's a whole show called Detectorists, which is lovely and quaint, and there is a legal way to do it. If you find something, you report it to the Portable Antiquities Scheme. It's this amazing system where the public helps map history. But Nighthawks are the evil twins. These are gangs, and I mean organized groups, who go out to protected archaeological sites in the middle of the night with night vision goggles and high-end detectors. They dig up Roman coins, Saxon brooches, Civil War weaponry, and they sell it on the black market. I was reading this article about a Roman site near where I live. The archaeologists were so excited to excavate it. They got there and it looked like the surface of the moon, pockmarked with hundreds of little holes. The Nighthawks had been there first. Here is why this is tragic, and I need to explain this because I didn't get it at first. I thought, okay, they stole the coins, that sucks, but an archaeologist friend explained to me that the coin itself is only 10% of the value. The other 90% is where the coin was found. Was it in a grave? Was it in a wall? Was it next to a pot? That context tells the story. When a Nighthawk rips a coin out of the ground and sells it on eBay, they aren't just stealing a piece of metal, they are deleting the data. They are erasing the story. It's like ripping the last page out of a mystery novel, so no one ever knows the ending. And the police here are actually using helicopters and thermal imaging to catch these guys. Imagine that, a police chase across a muddy field because someone is trying to steal the past. It is bizarre, but it is a massive problem. Now, speaking of theft, we have to talk about the roofs. Yes, the roofs. I was driving through a tiny village in the countryside, the kind of place that looks like a chocolate box cover. Thatch cottages, a pub called the Red Lion, and a beautiful medieval church. But I noticed something weird. The church roof was covered in blue plastic tarps. I assumed they were renovating. I stopped at the pub, obviously, and asked the bartender. He looked grim. No, he said. They stole the lead. I was like, who steals lead? Isn't that heavy? Apparently lead theft is a massive industry. Organized gangs strip the roofs of historic churches. These buildings have survived the Black Death, the Civil War, 2 World Wars, and the Blitz. But they can't survive 3 guys with a van and a ladder. The brutality of this crime is staggering. The scrap value of the lead might be a few £1,000s, but the damage, it's astronomical, because usually they do it at night. Then it rains. The water pours into the church, destroying medieval timber, 15th century paintings, the organ, the pews. The bartender told me about a church nearby where the thieves caused £100,000 worth of damage to steal £500 worth of metal. And because these are old community buildings, they often don't have the money for repairs. The community has to fundraise for years just to get back to square one. It's heartbreaking because it strikes at the heart of the community. In the US, a church is a building. Here, a parish church is often the oldest thing in the landscape. It holds the records of everyone born and buried there for 1,000 years. When you strip the roof, you are literally leaving the community's ancestors out in the rain. And it's not just churches. I read a story about a war memorial, bronze plaques with the names of soldiers who died in World War I. Stolen, melted down, for scrap. Imagine the mindset. You are taking the physical memory of a village's lost generation and turning it into cash for, what, a used car? a holiday. It creates this visceral anger in the UK that is hard to describe until you see it. Okay, this next one is a little different. It's not about stealing, it's about improving history to death. This is the home renovation disaster. I have a friend who bought a listed building. Now, for my Americans, a listed building means the government has deemed it historically important. You basically own it, but you are just the custodian. You can't change the windows, you can't knock down a wall, you sometimes can't even paint the front door a different color without permission. To an American who believes in my house, my rules, this sounds tyrannical. But then you see what happens when people ignore the rules. There was a case in London that was all over the papers. A developer bought this historic pub. It wasn't just a bar, it was a landmark. It had survived the Blitz, and the developer decided he wanted to turn it into luxury apartments. The city said no. So what did he do? He ordered bulldozers and knocked it down over a bank holiday weekend when the council offices were closed. The audacity! He thought, well, it's gone now, I'll pay a fine, and then I'll build my condos. But this is where I fell in love with the British legal system. The council didn't just fine him, they ordered him to rebuild the pub, brick by brick. They made him hire architects to study old photos, salvage the original bricks from the rubble, and recreate the building exactly as it was. It cost him a fortune. It was the ultimate find out moment. But not every story has a happy ending like that. I read about people who buy 500-year-old farmhouses and decide they want open concept living, so they knock out a timber beam, a beam that was cut from an oak tree when Shakespeare was alive. They don't realize that the beam is the house. The house starts to sag. They call a builder. The builder looks at it and goes, "Mate, you've just ruined a grade 2 listed structure." There was a story about a guy who sandblasted a medieval timber frame because he wanted it to look cleaner. He erased 600 years of patina, tool marks, and history in an afternoon. He turned a historic artifact into a generic piece of wood. It's this weird modern arrogance that we can make things better than the craftsmen who built them to last for centuries. And then there's the fire. You might have heard about the Crooked House pub. I won't go into too much detail because it's still a legal mess, but the general vibe was beloved historic building, weirdly burns down, gets demolished immediately. This happens more than you'd think. It's what preservationists call convenient arson. You have a historic building that is rotting. You can't tear it down because it's protected, but if it accidentally catches fire, well, then it's a safety hazard. You have to tear it down. And suddenly that land is worth millions for new housing. I was reading about this manor house that had stood since the 1700s. It was empty. The locals were fighting to save it. Then one night, boom, fire. The roof collapses. The structure is unstable. The bulldozers come in. It makes you so cynical. You start looking at every empty old building and checking your watch. It's a loophole in the system. The laws are there to protect the building, but they can't protect it from a jerry can and a match at 3 a.m. But let's pivot to something that feels very modern and very specific to our generation, the content creator destruction. I saw a video recently, and I won't name the channel because I don't want to give them clout, of a guy doing parkour on a historic ruin, jumping from medieval wall to medieval wall. Now, physically, it was impressive, but historically, it was horrifying. Those walls are held together by lime mortar that is crumbling. They aren't engineered for gym shoes. Every jump dislodges dust, stones, and integrity. And then there was the drone guy. He wanted the perfect shot of a castle, so he flew his drone way too close, lost control, and crashed it into a stained glass window. A window that had been there since the Victorian era. Smashed. For a TikTok transition. It's this main character energy where the history is just a backdrop for content. I read about people moving barriers to get a better selfie on a cliff edge, or climbing on statues to put a traffic cone on its head. Actually, the traffic cone on the statue is a very British tradition, specifically in Glasgow with the Duke of Wellington. That one is kind of funny and has become part of the culture. But when you climb a fragile sandstone monument to do it, you're damaging the stone. It's a fine line between cheeky culture and destroying the thing. But the one that really hit me emotionally was the story of the Sycamore Gap tree. If you don't know this story, it was this perfect tree, sitting in a dip in Hadrian's Wall. It was famous, it was in movies, it was beautiful. And one night someone went out with a chainsaw and cut it down. The entire country went into mourning. I'm not exaggerating. It was on the front page of every newspaper. People were crying. I went into work the next day, and the mood was like a national tragedy had occurred. Why? Because in the UK, the landscape is the history. That tree wasn't just wood, it was a landmark for hikers for generations. It was where people got engaged, it was where people scattered ashes. The person who cut it down didn't just kill a plant, they severed a connection that millions of people felt. It showed me that heritage isn't just old stones, it's living things too, and the fragility of it is terrifying. It took nature 300 years to grow that tree, and it took a confused, angry person 20 minutes to end it. So, what is the takeaway here? Why am I telling you all this depressing stuff? Because despite all of this, the British attitude toward history is still incredible, and it's something we can learn from. When I see these stories, I see the outrage. The fact that a stolen plaque or a felled tree makes national news proves that people care. In many places, old stuff is just junk to be replaced by a strip mall. Here, the old stuff is the soul of the place. There is a concept here called stewardship. The idea is that you never really own the land or the building. You are just looking after it for the next generation. The people who break that trust, the Nighthawks, the arsonists, the coin wedgers, are hated because they are breaking a compact with the future. Living here has changed me. I used to be the person who wanted to touch everything. Now I walk with my hands behind my back. I look at a crumbling wall, and I don't see a ruin. I see a survivor. And I've learned that the biggest threat to history isn't time, and it's not weather. It's us. It's our need to own a piece of it, to mark it, to sell it, or to tidy it up. So if you ever come to the UK, and you should, it's amazing. Do me a favor. Go to the ruins, walk the walls, soak it all in, but keep your coins in your pocket. Leave your spray paint at home, and for the love of God, if you see a beautiful tree, just take a picture, because the most American thing I can do now is tell you this stuff is fragile. And once it's gone, you can't 3D print a ghost. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with a local farmer in Yorkshire. This really sums up the clash between modern life and ancient ground. We were in a pub because that's where all the best intel comes from, and he was complaining about townies, that's city people coming onto his land. I thought he was going to complain about them leaving gates open or letting dogs chase sheep, which is the usual gripe. But no, he was angry about the barrow diggers. I had no idea what a barrow was. He explained that a barrow is a prehistoric burial mound. His land is peppered with them, lumps in the grass that contain the remains of chieftains from the Bronze Age. He said, they come at night, digging for gold. They think it's like Indiana Jones, but there isn't any gold, it's just bones and old pots. But they rip the mounds open, the rain gets in, and the archaeology turns to mush. He looked genuinely sad. Not because he lost money, but because, as he put it, those are the old ones. You don't disturb the old ones. This farmer, a guy who probably hasn't read a history book in years, had more respect for the 4,000-year-old dead than the enthusiasts with their metal detectors. It reminded me that in the UK, the past is literally under your feet. You can't dig a hole for a swimming pool without hitting a Roman mosaic or a Saxon sword. That leads me to the accidental destruction that happens with big construction projects. I was reading about this massive railway project they're building, and the law here says that before you build, you have to let the archaeologists in. It's called rescue archaeology. It sounds great, right? But the pressure is insane. I read a blog by a digger who said they are given weeks to excavate a site that people lived in for centuries. They are literally racing the bulldozers. He described it as strip mining history. They dig as fast as they can, throw artifacts into bags, record what they can, and then smash. The concrete pours. The site is destroyed forever. It makes you realize that every highway, every shopping center, every new housing estate in this country probably sits on top of a ghost town. It's the price of progress, I guess. But when you hear the stories of what gets crushed, ancient timber tracks, Roman villas, Viking hearths, it makes you look at a concrete parking lot a little differently. And we have to talk about the Instagram effect on nature reserves. I visited the Seven Sisters Cliffs recently. These are those iconic white chalk cliffs on the south coast. Stunning, but terrifying. Chalk is soft, it crumbles. I saw people sitting on the edge, legs dangling over a 300-foot drop, taking selfies. I was sweating just watching them. But the ranger told me that the foot traffic is actually wearing away the top of the cliffs faster than the ocean is eroding the bottom. Thousands of boots grinding away the delicate grass and soil cap. They've had to start banning tour buses in some places because the sheer weight of humanity is destroying the landscape. It's this weird paradox. We love these places so much that we are loving them to death. It reminds me of that story about the fairy pools in Scotland. It used to be this secret magical spot, then it went viral on social media. Suddenly, the single track roads are gridlocked with camper vans. The verges are churned into mud. The locals can't get to work. And the magic, it's hard to feel magic when you're standing in a queue of 40 people waiting to take the exact same photo. It's not malicious. Nobody goes there thinking, I'm going to ruin this. But the collective weight of our attention is a destructive force. And then there is the souvenir mentality. I was at a dinner party, and a guy, a very wealthy, educated guy, was showing off a piece of stone on his mantelpiece. He proudly told us he picked it up at a famous historic site in the Middle East. Everyone went quiet. My British friend very politely said, "So you stole it?" The guy was offended. No, it was just lying there in the rubble. This is a mindset we need to break. Just because something is on the ground doesn't mean it's trash. In an archaeological site, the rubble is the puzzle pieces. If everyone takes one piece, the puzzle is impossible to solve. The UK has been fighting this for years. They used to sell chisels at Stonehenge. Can you imagine? In the Victorian times, they would rent you a hammer so you could chip off a souvenir. It sounds insane to us now, but that was the culture. I came, I saw, I took a chunk. We have moved past that, mostly, but the impulse is still there. I want to touch on something a bit controversial. Restoration versus conservation. In the US, we love to make things look new. If we have an old building, we scrub it, paint it, and make it look like it was built yesterday. Disney style. The UK philosophy is different. They like the ruin aesthetic. They believe that the age is part of the beauty. But this leads to conflicts. I read about a village where a medieval bridge was damaged by a truck. The council wanted to repair it with modern reinforced concrete so it would be safe. The locals revolted. They wanted it repaired with traditional stone and lime mortar, even if it cost 3 times as much and took twice as long. They won, and that victory creates a culture. It says, we are willing to be inconvenienced to keep our integrity. However, there is a dark side to this purism. I've heard stories of people living in listed buildings who freeze in the winter because they aren't allowed to put in double-glazed windows. The preservation officer says plastic windows would ruin the character, so the homeowners are miserable, and eventually they sell. And who buys it? Maybe nobody. And the house sits empty, and then it rots. It's a delicate balance. How do you keep history alive without turning the country into a freezing cold museum that nobody can actually live in? I don't have the answer, but watching the British struggle with it is fascinating. Let's go back to the Nighthawks for a second, because the technology is getting scary. I read that some of these gangs are now using drones to scout fields before they go in. They look for crop marks, places where the wheat grows differently, because there is a wall underneath. They are weaponizing the very tools that archaeologists use. It's an arms race. Archaeologists are rushing to digitize records and secure sites, while the looters are upgrading their gear, and the market is global. A coin dug up in a muddy field in Lincolnshire ends up at an auction house in New York or Dubai. The provenance says private collection. Everyone knows it's stolen history, but as long as no one asks too many questions, the money keeps flowing. It makes me look at those antiquities shops in posh cities with a lot of suspicion. How much of that stuff was ripped out of the ground in the middle of the night? I want to end on a story that gave me hope. I was visiting a place called Vindolanda, near Hadrian's Wall. It's an active excavation site. You can actually volunteer to dig there. I watched a group of volunteers, regular people, teachers, accountants, retirees, carefully brushing away dirt. Suddenly, a woman gasped. She had found a shoe, a Roman leather shoe, perfectly preserved in the mud. She didn't try to pocket it. She didn't scratch her name on it. She cried. She was holding something that hadn't been touched since a Roman soldier threw it away 1,800 years ago. The archaeologists came over and everyone celebrated. It wasn't about the monetary value. It's an old shoe. It's worth nothing. It was about the connection. That moment showed me the opposite of the destruction. It showed me the reverence, the awe. The UK is fighting a constant battle to protect its deep time from modern idiots. But for every guy who carves Gary into a rock, there are 100 volunteers scrubbing that rock clean. For every Nighthawk stealing coins, there are 1,000 detectorists recording their finds for the museum. It's a messy, complicated, open-air struggle, and honestly, it makes me love this country even more, because they fight for their ghosts. So next time you see a keep off the grass sign in the UK, or a do not touch placard, don't think of it as a rule. Think of it as a plea. A plea from the past asking you to let it survive just a little bit longer. And seriously, if you see someone with a chisel near a monument, call the police. Or better yet, tell Sarah, she'll sort them out. And don't get me started on the love locks. You know, couples writing their names on a padlock and locking it to a bridge. It started in Paris, but it's everywhere in the UK now. It looks romantic until you realize the weight. Thousands of metal locks add tons of extra weight to bridges that were designed for horses and carts, not heavy metal love tokens. I read about a historic bridge that actually developed structural cracks because of the weight of the locks. They had to come in with bolt cutters and remove them all. People were crying, "You're destroying our love," and the engineers were like, "We're saving the bridge from falling into the river." Again, it's that main character syndrome. My romantic gesture is more important than the structural integrity of this 19th century ironwork. So what have I learnt from all this? I've learnt that preservation isn't a passive act. It's a fight against chemistry, against greed, against gravity, and against stupidity. Every old building you see standing in the UK is a survivor of 1,000 battles. It survived the fire, it survived the war, it survived the developer, and hopefully it will survive the tourists. And as an outsider, as an American, I feel incredibly protective of it now. I've adopted this history. It's not my ancestors, but it's my home. So when I see that crumbling wall at the end of my street, I don't just lean on it anymore. I give it a little nod of respect. Good job, wall, I think. You made it another day. And honestly, that's the vibe we all need to have. Respect the rock. Respect the wall. And for the love of everything holy, leave the metal detector at home. Because the true magic of the UK isn't that you can touch the history. It's that the history touches you. And if we keep smashing it, digging it up and selling it, we're going to wake up one day in a very shiny, very empty world. And nobody wants that. So stay curious, stay respectful, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.